Hi, we are with Janet Martin Welch. Today is September 17th, 2022. I'm going to ask you a few questions about your life. Born in Chicago,
Correct.
January 12th, 1945.
Right?
What do you remember about Chicago?
Absolutely nothing. We left Chicago when I was 3 years old.
Three, okay.
And so
Born in American
I've been
hospital.
told lots of things. I've been told that I was born on the south side of Chicago, which is not the posh end of the city by any means. So I like to tell Chicago people who know something about Chicago that I was born on the south side of Chicago, and that's because Grandma and Grandpa, my parents, lived on housing provided by the University of Chicago, where my father was working on his doctorate. And that's where the University of Chicago is located, and so that's where we were living, my family was living when I was born, south side of Chicago.
Right.
So, yeah. But I have no memories of
Okay.
the city.
And then you went to New York City from there?
Well, yes, my father got a job teaching at Columbia, and he'd been teaching at the University of Chicago, but he got a job at Columbia. So they moved east, which was a huge change for them because they're Midwestern. You know, they were born and raised and all part of Midwestern and very much love Chicago and all that. But for the job at Columbia, they decided to move east and they wanted to, because they had two children, my older brother and myself, they wanted to be in the suburbs, not in the city. So while they were looking for a house in the suburbs, they lived in the city. We lived in the city for, not a long time, I think less than a year in the city. And you said on Morningside Drive?
Riverside Drive.
I'm sorry, Riverside Drive. Riverside Drive?
That's what your father always said.
Oh, I thought it was Morningside Drive. Anyway,
One of them.
we lived in the city, but again, I have no memory of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so then, and you were in Metuchen,
Right.
and your mom was a teacher, but not
You've
at
skipped.
the-
Well, right,
A long way
you've
forward.
forgotten. Okay,
Oh.
we moved to Ridgefield, which is a very close suburb of New York City, and lived there for 6 or 7 years, I think. And that I certainly remember. We had a very nice house there and lovely neighbors. We used to sit outside, and the neighbors had a little dog, and we would sit outside under the umbrella and enjoy the dog. But I also started school in Ridgefield.
Okay.
So I remember walking to school, and my mother, who wasn't, women tended to stay home at that time. She didn't go to work till much later. She was at home. And she would walk me partway to school, but just to prove how mature I was allowed to walk But no, I remember, and the other thing was that I really remember about Metuchen is taking the bus to New York City. That was a big event. So we would go, and the bus was not too long a walk, and walk to the bus. And I remember standing in front of a building, which I thought had a sign on it that said "Real Easter," and I thought, "Real Easter? What the heck is that?" And at some point, I don't know whether I asked somebody or whether it just dawned on me that, but with my kindergarten or first grade reading ability, that it was real estate. But I remember that. I remember the building, I remember waiting for the bus, and I remember it saying "Real Easter."
Now, in those days, do you remember any visits with your father's family? You would see Stuart every now and then, I think your mom
Yes,
said.
we would along the way see Stuart yes. We saw Stuart fairly regularly. He was stationed at the large base in New Jersey.
Fort Dix.
Yes, he was stationed at Fort Dix. He was Navy, but he was liaison between the Navy and the Army at Fort Dix. So no, he was stationed there. No, we saw the family quite regularly. In fact, I was a bridesmaid in one of his daughter's weddings. So I mean, we were connected enough and close enough for that. Saw them quite a bit, and I always liked Stuart. really, really nice person. So then from Metuchen, then my father shifted again because he became dean of the library school. He shifted to Rutgers, and that's when we moved to Metuchen.
I gotcha.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Wasn't he also the founder? The first?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't he the first? He started
First,
the
Yes.
school?
Yes, I think he was. Yes, he was the founder of the school, yeah,
Okay.
and dean of the school. And so we moved to Metuchen, and Metuchen is sort of, that's sort of, when I think of New Jersey and growing up, that's sort of home, because that's where I went to. I was in elementary school when we shifted. Elementary and middle and high school, graduated from Metuchen High School.
Now, as
The
a
fire. The fire.
okay.
Oh, the fire. Well, okay, yes. The fire. When I was in 7th grade and my brother was in 11th grade, the school we were both in, he actually wasn't going to school in the school, but he was a runner. He had track practice, so he was in the yard of the school. I was in the school in a class, and the school burned down. Burned literally from the top, burned to the ground. And terrified, of course, and it burned quite quickly because it was an old school, had a lot of wood in it. And of course, the worst part of the whole experience, I know, was for my parents. My whole thing was get out. I remember the reason we knew there was a fire was before even the alarms went off, is smoke started pouring in the windows. And the teacher just said, I don't know what's going on, but get out. So
Right.
we, ran down the halls, ran out of the building. Everybody was running out of the building. And then the alarms went off. And Jeff at the time, my brother Jeff, was not in the building. He was outside running, although they used the building. He could have been in the building because they used the building for lockers and back showers and that kind of stuff. But anyway, for my parents, horrible. I remember when I then just walked home after a while, and after they were putting the fire out, we were just told go home. So I walked home, and I remember we lived on Rose Street, and we lived kind of up towards the top of the hill. And I'll never forget the look of my mother, who with all the other parents was standing out in the street. They had asked the parents not to go to the school. They said, we're trying to put out a fire and save anybody. Please don't go to the school. You're just going to be in the way. We're sending your children home. Wait at home for your children. And I just remember the look on her face when she saw me, because at that point they didn't know whether they had, anybody had perished or had been injured in the fire. And Jeff showed up not too much after that. So,
Wow.
but then my father was on the train from New York City, and remember, we didn't have our little phones in our hand giving us all sorts of the latest news. In fact, I think he said it just came as word of mouth on the train that it was Metuchen Middle School, was not the high school. Metuchen Middle School had burned down. Well, he's got children, one child in the school and one child doing track practice in the yard of the school. So he had an absolutely horrendous, horrible ride on the train till he got home and found out that everybody was okay. So, and then what they did is, so now they've got, middle and high school children, and they're missing this was a large building. It was 7th through 9th grade, and they're missing a building. What do you do with the kids? So they already had a new high school under construction, but it wasn't going to be ready. It wasn't going to be ready for another year. And so some of us, they did half-time. We did double time. There was a remaining wing of the building that didn't burn down. Some of us went half-time, and the older ones, including my brother, went to Perth Amboy, which is a town maybe 6 or 8 miles away, and went double time with the kids in Perth Amboy. So we all went for that year, because the fire happened in September. For that year, we only got half an education.
This is also the time period where Penny was your best buddy.
Yes. yes, my best friend all the way through that time, and all the way till Penny died, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and had contact with her and good friends with her all the way up through that time. But yes, Penny was my contact, and her family was very much my sort of second family, because in the summer we would go, my family went to Maine. First they rented there, and then my parents actually bought a place on China Lake in Maine. Beautiful lake, an absolutely lovely spot, and wonderful. They had boats, and it was, absolutely wonderful place to be. And so when my family went to Maine, which was usually in August, then Penny always went with us. It was just sort of, she was my friend and she was part of the family. But the other part of the summer in July, Penny's parents had a house on the Jersey Shore, in Bay Shore, near Toms River. So I always went with her to, actually lived with her family for a month each year. And her family, her father was the minister of the Dutch Reformed Church. And so that was a very interesting experience to be. Well, just one little story from that experience is the Dutch Reformed Church, while it was quite a liberal church for its time and its location, which was located in New Jersey, not in Michigan, where the church was founded. But so it could move a little away from the very strict teachings of the church. But one of the rules of the church was no alcohol. Well, of course, all the parishioners totally violated that. But the minister, of course, had to be held to a higher standard. Well, in their kitchen, low level under the kitchen sink, behind all the cleaning materials, was a bottle. And the bottle contained, I don't know what, because I didn't know at that time, now I probably wouldn't even know now, it was some sort of hard liquor. And when things got stressful at the church, they were always, when you see a church, not from the parishioner's side, but from the minister's side, there were always parishioners fighting each other and tension and all sorts of things going on in the church. And so you could always tell when things were really bad in the church, because you'd see him, you'd walk into the kitchen and he'd sort of be, I'm just fixing I'm just fixing the bottles here under the sink, and you knew what he was really doing. So.
I want to ask you, as a trailblazing woman and a lifelong advocate for women's rights and women's issues.
Thank you. Let me just do one more thing about Bay Shore.
Once you get her going, you see.
Bay Shore being, where I spent July of each year, that's where I met Bill Welch, on the beach in Bay Shore. So that was, that was my connection, and we started dating. My story is, but Bill disagrees with it, is that he first took Penny out. We double dated. I was 14 at the time. And we double dated, and I went out with his friend Lenny, and Penny went out with him. And then after the first day of double dating, he dumped Penny and switched to me. So,
Smart choice.
Smart. He's smart guy. Yeah. And the rest is history. We're still married after all these years. So So then.
Well, we used to walk every evening all over the area.
Yeah.
And it was our big social life together.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask you if you had any role models that were professional women, or was there anyone you looked up to in those days that made you think, I can chart a different path for myself than the generation before me?
I don't think so, because I don't think I thought of it that way at the time of charter. I didn't, I was going to be, breaking through glass ceilings and barriers and so forth. I didn't think of myself as that. I thought of myself as, I have a good education. I went to library school because, first of all, I knew libraries well because that had been my father's profession. I was comfortable. I liked libraries. And it was for a woman who was married and then presumably had children and might be moving around with her husband. It was you could get a library job anywhere. You still can. It's a good degree. Professional librarian is still, pretty much everywhere you go, you're going to find an opening of a decent job. Doesn't pay much, but it's a job, and usually the jobs are interesting because they're in libraries. And so that's why I did it. I don't remember having any sort of larger, although I was very, I wasn't active in the women's movement, but I certainly agreed with it.
Did you get out in the 60s? Did you get out in any of the protests?
I did a little bit when I was at Bucknell at college. I did a little bit of marching, yes. Mainly because I had a couple of girlfriends at college who I'm still friends with. Carol Gold, and Susan Hansen, Kathy Kane, and Mikey Reckberger were all close-knit college friends who we still see each other. We're still in communication almost every day. And particularly Carol and Susan were really into advocacy and marching and so forth. Women's issues were, abortion was as it was then. This was before Roe v. Wade. So getting women available, making it legal for women to have abortions rather than what they were doing at the time, which was very dangerous or very difficult to do. For abortions at the time, they either did them illegally, which who knows who was doing it or whatever, or if they had, and this quite frankly from Bucknell, most of the abortions were done overseas, like England had safe, low-cost abortions. If you had the resources and the wherewithal to go out of the country, you could get an abortion. And that's what, for people who came from upper middle class backgrounds and had the resources to do that, that's what they did. So anyway, but in terms of your question, I did some marching, but the truth is it wasn't my primary, I can't say these issues have always been very much a part of me, which came from my parents, who were very much into liberal issues, very active in them, always contributors to them. And certainly that outlook came from them. But other than marching, I didn't do anything active. I really was more focused on, getting my degree, going on, getting a master's degree, getting married, having a family. I think I was more focused on that than those particular issues. But I think over time what happened is I had more time to focus on those issues as other things kind of settled out, like marriage and children and all of that. And that started to become, they started to become more important for me. And then I had very interesting library jobs, including the one we moved from. We were living in the North Country. After we got married, we moved to Crown Point in the North Country. And because Bill had a job. Yes?
We started with you at NL.
I'm sorry?
We started with you at National Lead. You're way
Oh,
up.
that's true. Yes, I had my first job was at National Lead. That was in New Jersey, where we were living at the time. And it was an okay job, and it was, it paid reasonably well, and it was right there, located nearby, so it was fine. But then Dad went on, we moved to Albany, because Bill went on for his master's degree, so we moved to Albany, and then he got a job in Ticonderoga, way up north, so we moved way up north.
For your earlier subject of women's rights and all that, when we got to Albany, we felt we should have a credit card. Only one of us had a job. And what happened?
What happened is I was turned down for a credit card. I was working. I was bringing in the money. I had a very good job, an excellent job. I was science librarian at the State University of Albany library. So, again, you know, with the degree I found, you know, I really got good jobs. And it was, so I was working. I was bringing in a decent amount of money. Dad had a fellowship. He brought in a little bit of money. But anyway, I was the primary wage earner. But I could not get a credit card because he didn't make enough money and it could only be his income. My income didn't count.
And you think of that as being ancient times, and it was the 60s.
Right, yeah, it happened in the 60s. Yeah, so, and that kind of stuff just built up inside me, got me, you know, over time, more fired up over these issues. But then, again, I was working up in, worked as a school librarian way up north.
Whitehall.
I'm sorry?
Whitehall.
In Whitehall, actually it wasn't Whitehall, but okay, in Whitehall. But
Oh, that's right, Fort Anne.
it's Fort Anne.
We
right.
lived in Whitehall.
Right, we lived in Whitehall. But anyway, and then from there to Rochester in 1977, right? I think we moved to Rochester. And again, and our children we had young children by the time we moved to Rochester. We had two little children, Scott and Dana, but moved to Rochester because I didn't like being school librarian. It just wasn't a job I was really enjoying. And I got a really good offer to run a regional library system based in Rochester, but it covered quite a large territory. So we moved to Rochester, again with me, the primary wage earner. Again, we were starting to live some of these ideas, but again, I wasn't the one out there, you know, fighting for them. I was living them.
Yeah.
And the way I was living this one is Dad stayed at home. Bill was at home, and I worked when we moved to Rochester, to Fairport.
Talking with Scott about
And,
pro-life.
but he found that he wasn't like a lot of women do. He found that staying home with two little children
Give you a call.
was not his thing.
Yeah.
So he went back to work then too. And then we found Nikki, who we still have contact with, to take care of the children while we were both working. But then, but loved Fairport, still think of that as home, you know. For my adult home, I still think we were there 20 years, and children grew up there. I loved the work there, loved the job I had there, working with all the libraries. And, but then I was very active in libraries, meaning I was president of this and, you know, a lot of volunteer work, but within the library field. Not so much within women's rights, although the library field has always been very liberal and certainly touched on women's rights. But primarily because librarians are mostly female, and that was at a time when, which is still true, just not as much, that was at a time where the larger the library, the more chance that it would be headed by a man. That men who got their library degree and went into the library field immediately became director of the world, and women became the people who worked under them, who worked for them.
Before you move ahead, Planned Parenthood, you were on the board of Planned Parenthood.
That's true, yes, that's true.
And
Again, for active, yes, I
What was interesting back then, because it was so conservative, girls who needed help, and they were girls, would come to our house, and we'd put their car behind the barn, and they would go to her to plan, with her to plan.
No, that's true, I forgot, So I have been, you know, I don't think of myself as a active, primarily as my primary focus, active in women's rights issues, but certainly the Planned Parenthood was very much a women's rights, and very much one where, you know, it was kind of a scary process. We were going in a very conservative community, very much opposed to Planned Parenthood and anything we were doing. And
It was so conservative. There was a young, very, very good female teacher. I don't remember her name, but she had the audacity to ride her bike through town with biker's shorts on that I guess would be normal now, but were considered obscene by the conservative people in town, and she was not invited back.
Well, Mom, what do you remember about these? What were you doing with these women that were parking their cars behind the barn? How were you giving them guidance? Were you driving them
no,
somewhere?
I didn't really. My job was, in my role on the board is I worked more with trying to get funding, trying to get support for Planned Parenthood, not in the community. But no, it was just they needed somebody to hide cars. And so we hid cars. But no, I never was involved directly in counseling the women and so forth. I was involved more in what I'll call the administrative and governing issues.
Right. Now, how do you think your dad? Obviously, a great deal of pride, but what were conversations with him like about libraries and the work you were doing?
Oh, I think he was always proud of me. I mean, I know he was always proud of me. And we were close to my parents. I mean, they came to live near us in Rochester. And after they retired and decided that they were getting old enough that Florida wasn't what they wanted anymore. And but I don't remember any particular conversations.
You weren't talking shop or...
Yeah, I don't remember talking shop with him a whole lot. I remember talking family with him.
Yeah, I remember the discussion he had with you where he said, well, you can go to Albany, but you have a choice. You can be a big fish in a little pond, or you can be a small fish in a big pond. And she chose to be the little fish in the big pond.
This was my second Albany job, are you talking about? The state library job?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, obviously, I think, again, when you think of family, my parents did not want me to go to Albany.
Yeah.
Because it resulted eventually in what did happen, and that is, over time, we started getting more Albany-based. I had a house in Albany, and this is now, remember, there are two Albanys. One is Albany when I was the science librarian when Dad was in graduate school, and now this is second Albany where I'm going to be state librarian. And it focused us away from Rochester.
Mm-hmm.
And I think both my parents were very upset. So I'm not sure how much any advice I got from him may have been based on, oh, this is a great opportunity.
Right.
To,
I'm super curious about something before the state library job.
Yeah.
Which was that our family was the first family I had ever heard of with access to internet. You got us a dial-up connection through Hobart.
Mm-hmm.
It took forever. Couldn't even do pictures.
Yes.
But we were the proverbial first kids on the block with the internet.
Yeah.
So, and then you obviously evangelized the internet superhighway and went on to do important work bringing that technology to libraries. Yeah. But what I'm curious about is how did you know that this was an important thing that was coming? An important technology to libraries.
I think while I never studied technology myself, that I always had an appreciation for what it was and could do. And that goes again, my father had his bachelor's degree was in engineering. So he was always interested in technology, talked technology. But one of my earliest memories is we were first in our neighborhood, this was in New Jersey, and I was like 6-8 years old or something like that, who had a television. So I sort of had grown up with the new technology. We want it, we have it.
I remember he bought a calculator, and not one of these, an electronic calculator. All it did was add, subtract, divide and multiply. That's all it did. $250, but he bought it.
So
Yeah.
do you think you saw the internet at work somewhere or in academia? Like, how did you think
Oh,
about
yes.
transferring that technology?
Yes, very much a part of, again, I was very much into the library world. You know, the national meetings, I was an officer, I was president of this, I was, and the library world was very early. You don't, the stereotype of librarians is, the little old lady sitting in the corner reading a book or something. The active library world, mainly younger people, was at that time very technology oriented, very excited about what this crazy thing. I remember going to Cornell to a meeting where some of the professors there showed a group of us of what they were doing. This was when the internet was just for colleges, and was showing us what they were doing. And I thought, wow, we gotta get into this for
I
libraries.
thought you did an internet type service at NL. That was the main part of the library you put in there.
Internet type service at where?
National Lead.
Certainly the National Lead, this goes back to first job after library school. Yes, certainly at National Lead we did an organization of information that used computers.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I went back to Rutgers. I had my library degree from Rutgers. I went back to Rutgers and took a computer course, just so I'd know what the heck this was back when computers were, they took up the whole room. But National Lead had a computer. Mm-hmm. And yes, we did use the computer to organize and store information, and then retrieve it. And this goes back to National Lead.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, this was early 70s?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've always, either through my work or through my background or just through my approach, has just always been technology, or what it can do, or, I want to be part of it. And, this was a particular technology that just, in terms of the library world, if I'd been in another field, I might, if I'd been in law, I might not have been that excited about what it could do. But in terms of libraries and our card catalogs, it was, but I wasn't the only one in the library world to see this. There were other people. I also wasn't the only one in the bigger world. I went with, sorry, name is gone. The company who funded our early internet access, the big computer company.
Melinda
Bill
Gates?
Gates. Bill and Melinda Gates.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes. And this, even though I was state librarian, and normally, we applied for and got a lot of grants, and normally I wasn't, I had staff who would do most of that. I would just sign the papers. But this one, Gates Foundation, big deal, lots of money, bringing computers and internet access we started with the smaller rural libraries and then moved it, just because they didn't have any of this in New York State. Major, multi-million funding. This I did
Crown Point, Ticonderoga, places like that.
Yeah, this I did myself. I went to Seattle and had meetings. Bill Gates I only saw in a group meeting. Melinda I did work with directly. Liked her. She's a very nice person. Liked working with her. So, so that brought to New York State the computer access, which now, of course, is routine. Everybody has it, but at the time,
very few people even had internet in their homes.
Oh yes, well that remains, but has always, certainly at that time, was yes. Where can we provide it for people who don't have it? At the library. Who else is going to do it without charging you to have internet access for the people? And it's still for people who can't afford it at home, or their computer's broken, or their whatever. If you go over to the library here today, you'll find they'll have 20 or 30 computers lined up, and you'll find them all in use.
You want to take a break?
It was fun when she was in Albany. We first got her an apartment in this 1920 or 1930s apartment building. It wasn't run down, it was very well preserved, but it was like English country design.
Yeah.
She had to live with, they turned the heat on a certain day in October, whether it needed it or not, and turned it off a day in Maine when
Yeah.
it needed it or not,
Yeah.
in May.
Yes, I did live in a number of lower level dwellings in Albany, but nothing terrible. But
She would go out in the morning, some mornings in the winter, and the car was snowed in.
yeah, it was bad to dig
Because
my,
the
you know.
plow didn't come until
Yeah.
after
I'm
she'd
all dressed up
already be
for a
at work.
meeting, you know, I gotta talk to the senator or this or the chair or that kind of thing, and or I'm gonna talk to hundreds of people, and I'm all dressed up and I'm out there digging my car out of the ice and snow.
So we bought the Albany house, which I think you've been at, and what she did, because the plow was no better, she backed that SUV into the garage. And then in the morning when she was ready to go to work, she'd open the door and vroom with
Yeah,
the
we
four-wheel
had
drive.
four-wheel drive, and I just kept backing up and then going forward till I plowed it myself. But the going to the house in Albany, we really didn't want to own two houses because we still had the house. Bill was living and working in Rochester, and my parents were there. Certainly didn't want two houses, especially since I had pictured my Albany job as just a couple of years. I didn't imagine, I stayed 11 years, which I didn't imagine I would do. But I remember I said to Bill, I don't care where we go, I don't care what you find for me, he said, but it's got to have a garage, and the garage has to be attached to the house. That's it, that's all I care about, I'm not going through the winter garbage, it's just, I've had enough of that.
You did a lot of amazing things at the State Library. I think some of the coolest stuff was your oversight of the museum and then taking care of the artifacts for the 9/11 museum while they were working down there. But then also the collections of the museum and the library combined, you were responsible for some incredible pieces.
It was absolutely, yes, absolutely. That was an amazing job. I mean, I was just, not only you think of the library and museum and that sort of concrete, you can think of what I had. I mean, these things are physical, and there were a huge library, a huge and very interesting museum. But I was also, because I was not only state librarian, I was also what they called Assistant Commissioner of Education, which meant I worked with the Commissioner of Education, who I liked a lot. We got along really well. So I worked a lot on other projects, and that's why I didn't happen to work with the Jewish library, Jewish education problem in Brooklyn and so forth. But I'm very familiar with it because that's the kind of issue I worked on for the state education department. They put me on various committees and groups and so forth that worked on a lot of these issues. Like there was one going out to towards Long Island. I can't remember the name of the town, but right on the border from New York City to Long Island, where running out of space. Where people would put relatives and friends and paying rental people in the lower levels of their houses in order so that they could have an address in that area and then could put their children into the local public school.
Right.
And that was an issue. That's illegal to do that. You have to actually live there. But how do you get after that? How do you change it? How do you find out who has who living in their basement and where does that person really live? And so it was just problems like that I worked on with the state education department. So it was a very interesting job. Half the time I absolutely loved it, and the other half the time I hated it because New York State, maybe all states are this way, but New York State is a huge, absolutely immovable bureaucracy. And getting anything done that was out of the ordinary was just an incredible battle that you didn't always win.
You couldn't fire people.
I'm sorry?
You could
Yes,
not-
right, could not fire people.
Only
Yeah, union.
and some of the outrageous things that people did in the library,
Yeah.
and she couldn't fire them.
And my parents my family was so pro-union that they had seen unions come and give workers, opportunities that they didn't have. But I'll tell you, working with the union in Albany was one of the reasons I retired.
Did you ever go down to the vault and say to all by yourself and just look at the Emancipation Proclamation or Washington's sword and say to
yeah.
yourself, I cannot believe I'm responsible for these
I never
things?
went by myself, but I certainly, when I did do it, I said to myself, I can't believe it, yes. Oh, yes, there was no question. I can't believe I'm doing this. I can't believe I'm in charge of all of this, But then it was like, it's 2:00. I got the meeting with the union representative on whatever I got. Here we go again.
One of the things I thought was really cool is we were invited down to Ellis Island before it was rehabbed. It was back in its original condition, just festering out there, if you will. We went through and people were telling us about it. The ferry, which they probably still have now, but when we went, it was sunk at the dock because no one had gone out.
Right.
But walking through and seeing that place,
Well, and you guys were in New York Harbor for the bicentennial, right?
Yes, we were. Yes, I don't remember exactly how, but being in the
Was it
position.
the Menego's boat or your?
she
In a
were
boat,
on the,
yeah.
you were on the
But
boat.
again, we had, as you're finding with Shefali, that sometimes the things that you do give you connections that all of these things were connections through my position, that it was being offered and it was offered to me, and so I took it. But they were, I wasn't offered it because I was Janet Welch. I was offered it because I was the assistant commissioner, and there were only 3 assistant commissioners, and in order to get, usually they were groups who wanted support of the state education department for something, and so gave us an opportunity to meet and greet and be part of various events. And yes, the bicentennial was something I don't remember the details of how it was arranged, but yes, all of that was arranged, and then the going to Ellis Island and so forth, all of that was through my job.
That issue you talked about with people finding fake addresses, so to speak, or people who will consider them for a school district, that still happens in New York City.
People that, I'm sorry, I didn't.
People who try and use a friend's address to get into certain school districts in New York City, that still happens.
Yes. Well, I say that's why when I read the article in the New York Times about the
Hasidic
about the
population,
Jewish school
yeshivas,
districts,
yeah.
I thought, oh boy, I know that one. I know that situation really well.
One of the math teachers in Ticonderoga rented an apartment in Ty because he lived in Crown Point.
I'm gonna pause.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Mo.
Hi. Okay. Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about my career, which was certainly exciting, and I'm very grateful for. But I'm sitting here with family, and I just wanted to wind up with how the best thing I've had in my whole life is my husband, Bill, and my wonderful family, children and grandchildren. Just I couldn't be more grateful, more thankful, and more appreciative of who you are, what you are, everything you're doing, and everything you're doing for me. So I want to wind up with that as the career was wonderful and is fun to talk about, but family that's the best. Family and my dear close friends who are standing with me now through this struggle that I'm going through. So thank you.